My name is Willie Hensley, also known as Igġiaġruk at home, named for my grandfather. Born in Kotzebue. Spent 10 years in the legislature, 20 years with NANA, 3 years as Commerce Commissioner, 10 years with Alyeska Pipeline. Now I'm retired. I was 25 when I took office in January of '67, the same year that Willie became governor and took office at the same time. So I served 2 terms in the House and then a full term in the Senate, and then I was out for 12 years, and then when Senator Ferguson had his stroke, I was appointed by Governor Cooper to fill out the rest of his term. So I spent 10 years in the legislature and 3 years as Commerce Commissioner under Governor Knowles. Well, yes, I did have my sort of public role as a legislator, but I was also a founder of the Alaska Federation of Natives, and so I was always playing a key role in the AFN from the beginning, along with Emil Noddy and others. I think he and I are about the only ones left now. But so I had my duties as a legislator, unrelated, of course, to oil industry issues. I mean, I had all kinds of issues. I had housing issues, employment issues, education issues, and so I had to work on all of those health issues out there. But at the same time, of course, got involved with issues relating to oil and gas, but a lot of my involvement involved land. That was how I got interested in politics because of a research paper I did after I left George Washington and graduated there, and I went to Fairbanks to do some graduate work, and then I wrote a paper researching the issue of essentially who owned Alaska. And I came to the conclusion that we did, that is, the Native people did, from a technical standpoint, because the underlying Aboriginal title had never been extinguished by Congress. And so the fact of the matter is that, when the Congress passed the Statehood Act, they authorized the new state to select over 100 million acres without so much as a hearing and with no compensation, of course, to the Native people. And so that was sort of the essence of the paper I wrote called Alaska Native Claims, a Primary Issue. That was in the spring of 1966 when I was at Fairbanks. And so that actually prompted me to take an interest in the legislature because I had an issue. I mean, there are many issues, but to me, this one was key because people out there needed to have confirmation of their title to land. And so that, as it turns out, became a huge issue that consumed the state between 1966 and 1971. So I was involved on that side of it through the Alaska Federation of Natives. But at the same time, of course, I was in the legislature doing things that legislators do. And of course, promptly had conflicts, of course, with the state because as far as the state was concerned, well, their thought was, well, Congress authorized us to select all this land, and by God, we're going to do it. And of course, our position was, no, you cannot have that land because we still have Aboriginal title to it, and so that, of course, set up a huge conflict that eventually was actually resolved, I think, in a rather creative and almost miraculous way, So, what prompted, of course, national attention on the issue of land was the discovery of oil at Prudhoe Bay, on land that the state had selected under the Statehood Act. They had tentative approval to that land. And of course, at that point in time, America needed that oil. And needless to say, when it became apparent that they had to build a pipeline, we knew that if they built the pipeline without resolving the question of who owns land in Alaska, they would forget about us, right? And so we fought tooth and tongue. We were able to get Secretary Udall, the Secretary of Interior, to actually cease processing state selections when there was a claim. So as an example, I borrowed $10 or $20 from a guy named Harry Punnick in Fairbanks, a Inupiat guy he lived there, but he was from our area, to buy stamps. And I took that research paper I wrote and I condensed it down to like 4 pages, and I sent that to the villages in the Kotzebue area, and basically explaining the sort of the history and the law as I understood it. And that led to the formation of the Northwest Alaska Native Association, and we made a claim about 30 million acres, okay, in that region. Arctic Slope had made their claim 6 months earlier. And so that became really a statewide problem for the state, because by the time we organized the Alaska Federation of Natives in October of 1966, essentially we ended up claiming virtually all of Alaska. In fact, about 150% of Alaska because of overlapping claims. And so that became the big issue. And of course, Governor Hickel, he was no, wilted flower. He was a boxer, and he was a decision maker, and he was full of energy. And by God, he was going to run over us tooth and tongue, because it was his job, right? He was trying to get the land for the state that was promised by Congress, and we said no. Congress made a mistake. They did not have the authority to convey lands to the state because it's our land, and there has been no treaty or no settlement. And so, long and the short of it was Secretary Udall made the decision not to process state selections when the land was being claimed by an indigenous group. And so that led to a major issue because the state had so little income at the time that they needed all the revenue from federal revenues, right? That was the whole idea. The state had a small population, just over 200,000, no significant industry, just a small production from the Kenai area. And so that's why they were promising all the 103 million acres of our land for the new state to try to survive. And so, but we were sort of cutting off their sources of revenue by stopping the land sales. In any case, the oil discovery at Prudhoe just kind of ramped up the pressure tremendously. And so lo and behold, though, the land freeze that stopped all state selections was in jeopardy, because what happened in '68? Richard Nixon won. And lo and behold, who does he pick to become the new secretary? Our arch enemy over here, Uncle Wally Hickel, who we'd been fighting with over the land freeze. And so we knew we had a problem, but long and the short of it is we worked well with Wally. He set up a task force that I chaired called the Land Claims Task Force, when I was still in the House, by the way. And our job was to come up with ideas for the state to try to move the issue forward, because we were at loggerheads. AFN had no money. They couldn't even come together, with tickets or a hotel room or food for the representatives. So this Land Claims Task Force was actually funded by the state. And like I said, our job was to come up with ideas to move this thing off the dime and try to move it forward. So we came up with what I think was almost a miracle, sort of, because the problem is that most non-Native Alaskans are familiar with reservations, right? And the reservations are pretty much places that non-Natives are not exactly allowed, right? I mean, And so Alaskan politicians understood that. So if we came up with this idea of saying we wanted like 200 reservations, that was a no-no. I mean, we would never get the support of the governor, the delegation, the congressman. And so, so we came up with this idea of state-chartered corporations owned and controlled by Native shareholders, and private property instead of federal trust property. Trust property basically is turning it over to Uncle Sam to run, because the Bureau of Indian Affairs has to make all the decisions with respect to reservation lands, right? And so that actually broke the logjam. We also came up with the idea of revenue sharing. And so the political atmosphere changed dramatically with those ideas. And those came up in 1969. And so 2 years later, you know, those ideas came out in ANCSA, the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. So Wally Hickel played a key role because he was the first elected official to support the 40 million acres when he was still governor. And of course, so when he got to D.C., he was well versed in the issue. And so he was very helpful in helping in getting Nixon to support the legislation. So that's a kind of a condensed version of how we got to where we are. Literally, we'd have virtually no private land in Alaska if we had not got ANCSA. I mean, everything would be owned by the state and the federal government. Well, no. From this, let's put it this way: that settlement was the biggest settlement, the most generous settlement ever in Indian country in the United States. But yet, what did we give up? We gave up, you know, our claim to 365 million acres, but we got almost as much land as all the other Indians in the lower 48 with the 44 million acres. So, I mean, and so people are unhappy. Some people are unhappy with the corporate setup, but the reality was that we were interested in the land, because people have to have their land. And so those ideas we came up with helped us get the political support, you know, to get ANCSA passed. And in some ways, you know, we got the best of both worlds. We still have the tribes that have their connections to Uncle Sam and the various programs, and we have the corporation, which is not a governing entity, but their job is to create revenue, create jobs, and they do a whole plethora of other things that most corporations don't do. Initially, when I first got to Juneau, of course, the big issue was how much to tax the oil industry, right? And so in those days, I was in my 20s, not a lot of experience, so I sort of took my cues from Governor Egan in terms of relationship with the oil industry. And so at first, I was thought to be sort of negative toward the oil industry. Not necessarily, I was necessarily that, but what was important, though, was when they formed the consortium, Alyeska pipeline. Patton, the head of the consortium, was very positive in supporting a resolution of the issue. Now, that was important because Alaskan business people didn't exactly see what we were trying to do, and we fought with the miners. They were nasty. We fought with the chambers of commerce. We fought with the timber people. We fought with the territorial sportsmen. We fought with everybody. But when the consortium supported the notion of a settlement, I think that was very, very good politically in Alaska. And so the next big thing, of course, was, as it turns out, the general legislation on pipelines was inadequate for the massive Trans-Alaska pipeline. So Congress had to pass legislation that would, the 20-foot on either side of the right-of-way on federal land was just not adequate, so they had to pass legislation. So that became a major battleground. The Senate was split right down the middle, and we were the Alaska Native community was caught in the middle. But we had spent 66 to 71, developing friends, trying to get enough votes to get our legislation through, and which we did eventually with Richard Nixon's support. And so I got a call one day. I was at that time president of the AFN, and it was Senator Jackson's staff. He was chairman of the Interior Committee, and he was going to have to carry the legislation, and he knew he was in trouble. There was a bunch of legislators, senators in particular, who were wanting to have the pipeline go through Canada and then down to the Midwest, to Chicago. Well, that essentially was killing the notion of the pipeline. And so and there was a notion that the Alaska Natives were not excited about Alaska being split down the middle with a steel pipe. And Jackson wanted to dispel that notion, so he called me as head of AFN. So I took Sam Kita with me, and we flew down to D.C. I remember walking into the senator's office, and I saw Bill Van Ness, the general counsel for the committee. We'd known him from our years on ANCSA. And I said, "Who called this meeting anyway?" And from behind the door says, "I did." It was the senator. The senator was behind the door getting ready to come out. So I said, "Well, Senator," I said, "we really appreciate all you did for us in helping get our land settlement." What I was too dumb to realize that he was sort of calling in a chit, really. He wasn't too crude as to say, "Well, I got you $1 billion and 44 million acres of land, and I need your help." But I told him, I said, I have a couple of issues. I said, number one, I said, if there's a spill along the pipeline and some village is impacted, their water sources are destroyed or there's damage to the community, I said, I'd like to see them get prompt relief, not to have to go through some lengthy litigation. I said, the other thing is jobs and training. And so I said, we know there's going to be thousands of jobs. Unless we have some sort of a mechanism that allows villagers a chance to work, they're going to be bypassed. And so I had a certain number in mind. Anyway, so what does he do? He sends me down to the Department of Interior. And there I negotiated two provisions into the grant of right-of-way, Section 28 and Section 29. One dealing with health, the other, environmental issues, the other dealing with training and employment, and which is still in effect today. So our people from the villages had a chance to go to work on the pipeline. We had a certain number in mind. I forget it was 3,000 or 4,000, but needless to say, over the 3 years of construction. So people had a chance to earn some money, maybe buy a fishing permit or a boat or buy a new house. And so it worked, and it's still in effect. Of course, the oil industry forgot about it for about 15 years after the construction of the pipeline. So they were kind of in jeopardy for litigation, but they ramped it back up, and it's been operating ever since. So we've had a good relationship there. And also the reality was that over the course of time, as the corporations were formed, BP and ARCA were just big players in terms of contracting in the Prudhoe Bay area. And so Arctic Slope, Doyon, Chugach, Otna, they've all had contractual relationship with the pipeline for decades now. And in the early days, actually, I interacted with both ARCO and BP, and I think one of my first projects was, and nobody remembers this, but to me, I remember it very distinctly. after the borough was formed, of course, that's another thing. I mean, I was in the Senate when the borough was being formed. Of course, the state industry wasn't exactly happy about the formation of the borough, but it got formed, and I knew Eben Hobson he was the first mayor, wanted to try to do something with the oil industry. So I came up with this idea of, there was something called a BP dump right along this pristine Salvanetta River. I mean, when the state created Deadhorse, they didn't do any planning. They just went out there and they did a runway, and then they created some lots, and they started willy-nilly, issuing contracts or leases to any fly-by-night operator, and a lot of them went bankrupt and left. There was no plan for solid waste or sewage treatment, and so this BP dump became an eyesore. And if the nation had figured it out, it would have been a real blow to the industry early on. And so I worked with the borough and convinced them to create Service Area 10. And I had an engineer who helped me come up with some ideas, and so we ended up actually designing and constructing the state's largest solid waste disposal system for the borough. And it was something that they could work with the industry on. And of course, the industry was going to be the customer. And also we did a sewage treatment system for all the operators up there that were not connected to BP or ARCO. And we also did a water reservoir, because on the slope, of course, you need depth, and so we created this reservoir. Anyway, that was, I did that under contract with a company called Nana Environmental Systems. And so that was a humongous project in those days, about a $30 million project. So that was one of the things that we did with the industry. The other was running into Mike Savage, whom I had met. He was a Brit. He was operating out of San Francisco. I ran into him at the Captain Cook, and he said, well, we're planning on bidding on some leases in the Beaufort Sea. And he said, I'm thinking about inviting Arctic Slope to join us in the bidding. And I said, Mike, that's a great idea, but the better idea is to invite all the regional corporations to join you, and I'll help you, right? So so he agreed, and so I actually got 5 regions. I think Arctic Slope didn't, but I got Nana and 4 other regions to bid with BP on what became the Endicott field. And of course, their idea was to try to show what it takes to actually do a development, from doing the bidding to securing the bid to designing and constructing, and because most people in Alaska didn't have any idea about what the oil industry was all about. So that was one of the successes. But really, in reality, though, I got interested in the drilling side, learning that there were going to literally be thousands of wells that had to be drilled. And in those days, the rigs that were up there were all designed for work in Oklahoma or Texas or some warm place, right? And so what I did was I got Nana into a joint venture on one rig, and I forget who ran it. It was a guy named Stubbs Stevens. And we only took a 20% interest, but that was like a couple $1 million. And I had to talk to my board real hard to get them to agree to it. But as it turns out, it was such a good deal that when I learned that BP had a 3-rig package that they were going to be bidding out, it was about the same time that the Endicott thing came up. But I was more interested in the rig package than I was in the Endicott thing, because that was going to create jobs, right? And so, as it turns out, I put together a little consortium that bid on those rigs, and we got 2 of the 3 that were built actually here in Anchorage. Yes, at that point, yes. Yeah, Doyon came later. In fact, I think I sort of introduced them to the idea because I tried to get them to join NANA when we were trying to put the package together. But in any case, we always had a good relationship, with BP in particular. ARCO was harder. They were harder to deal with. But eventually we got a workover rig from ARCO. So those were the ventures that I got involved with. And there's one more. Back in those days, we were all sort of learning the ways of business. We came from villages. We came from a different culture, most of us. And when you had receptions, I always thought it was like social, but I didn't realize that it was about business. Anyway, I remember George Nelson was head of BP at the time, and I had gotten to know him because of the rigs. And I heard him say something about, he talking to me. He said, I'm thinking about helping Pingo get into business. Pingo was the consortium of village corporations, And I said, what are you thinking about? He said, well, I'm thinking about getting them into the hotel business up in the Prudhoe Bay. I said, what? I said, we had bought, Bert Atwood's pile of junk up there, this hotel and all his facilities, paid a good price for them. And I said, the business was shitty. Business was down. I mean, it was one of those down periods. I said, why don't you let me take care of that problem? So I went to Thomas Nuparak and we arranged a deal where we gave him a certain percentage for Pingo of a contract we got with BP. It turns out that BP they needed more space. Their big space age type facility over there was overcrowded, and a lot of them were our people. They were security people and whatnot. So we arranged to have a contract to take the overflow of people to the Nana Oilfield Hotel, and we built in a certain amount for improvements, and Pingo got X amount of money per month, So it was a good deal for us, a good deal for BP, and a good deal for Pingo, right? Anyway, so that was another deal that we put together. Actually, when when we bought Bert Atwood's operation, he had the hotel. He had this little electric utility where he had a little power plant that provided power to the airport and a few other customers. And then he had a catering company, and so we actually ended up being in the electrical business because of that little power plant, Arctic Utilities. And so it turns out that it became, an opportunity to expand. And so that's what we did. We built additional power facilities there. Mm-hmm. So that was sort of our activity on the slope. We did some work along the pipeline. I think we had one site where we did catering during the pipeline construction. We also did some remediation following construction. We also did security work with Nana Security at the time. Yes. Well, George had a tough time, George was a kind of rough type of a character from America, and he wasn't an effete British type, right, that they're accustomed to. And so George had a tough time actually securing the job as head of BP in Alaska. We backed him, and I thought he did a good job for him. Exxon was a quiet partner. It was BP and ARCO, and I always had relationships. In fact, we got to be friends with the chairman of ARCO and the executive vice president, whose names I can't remember at this point. I can see them because they actually came to Kotzebue for the opening of the Nullavik Hotel when we opened it up, but we had, like I said, we had to work hard to get work from ARCO. BP was more open to the idea. Of course, I actually spent 10 years with Alyeska, because Bob Malone recruited me, and I became manager of government relations in D.C. for, I think, 9 years. But before that, like I said earlier, we had the Section 29 provision in the grant of right-of-way that worked well during construction, but it was forgotten for 15 years. So there was potential for litigation there. But Alyeska remedied that and has done a great job with it to this day. But when pipeline renewal came up, there was concern. It took hundreds of millions of dollars for Alyeska to prepare for the permit and to secure the I think it's a 20-year permit. And as a consequence of that period, Malone was able to secure for the First Alaskans Institute an endowment of $20 million, which, by the way, after 20 years, we still have $20 million. So we've husbanded it. It actually came through AFN. The industry was about to get sued, I think, for lost wages for those 15 or 17 years where they sort of ignored Section 29, which is really the law. It was part of the right-of-way requirement just as much as any environmental law. Anyway, long and short, we've had a good relationship with the oil industry. We often have dinners with the pipeline owners, and oftentimes, occasionally take fishing trips together to keep up the relationship, yeah. Alyeska suffered mightily, reputation-wise, in Washington. And allegations of not doing proper maintenance and maybe mistreating employees. And as you might recall, there was an outlet for whistleblowers who I knew actually a long time ago, before he became the arch enemy of the oil industry up here, whose name kind of escapes me at the moment. But in any case, the industry was, the Congress felt like the pipeline was their baby, right? So, because they had to pass a law to get the pipeline built. And over the course of time, the House Commerce Oversight Committee had, hearings on the operation of the pipeline, and there were all kinds of allegations of maybe not doing proper maintenance on the pipeline, and maybe not allowing individuals to properly do their job in reporting issues. And in those days, and I can't remember the years, maybe in the 70s, maybe 80s, maybe, the owners were very controlling, right? And my recollection is that the Congress wanted the president of Alyeska Pipeline to operate independent of the owners when it came to maintenance issues and personnel issues, right? And I'll never forget, I think David was his name, a Brit who went up to testify. Pritchard, yeah. Bless his soul. He showed up there, and the chairman of the committee asked him if his presentation was reviewed, by the owners, and he said yes. And after that, he had no credibility whatsoever, because they wanted the pipeline company to be able to manage the pipeline in the way that it should be managed when it came to proper maintenance, and proper treatment of the employees. And anyway, so and so actually they hired a guy to represent the company who actually was an employee of the House Oversight Committee. And Roger, I can't remember his last name now. No. Roger had tremendous power because of his perceived, connection to the chairman of the committee, who in fact he was from Illinois. I think he served like 50 years in Congress. He was very powerful. And but my experience with working with Malone, and I worked with, I forget how many of the presidents in the 9 years I was in D.C., but I always had great access. Senator Stevens, Senator Murkowski, Don Young, I mean, they were all very good to work with. And the fact that that at one time, Murkowski was chairman of the Senate Interior Committee, Senator Stevens was chairman of House Senate Appropriations. I mean, they had clout. And Don Young was chairman of House Transportation. I mean, cripes, I could meet with anybody I needed to, right, to help represent the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. And there were issues. I mean, while I was there, we had the shooter incident, right, where some guy ding-a-ling shot a hole in the pipe, hit it in the right way, and then spewed oil everywhere, and it was just all over the United States and the world saw this humongous, leak as a consequence. So, we had to deal with that, and then we had the earthquake. I mean, a tremendous earthquake. I forget, 7-point something earthquake, and it, as it turns out, to me, all the green critics who are always trying to find something wrong, I think the fact that the pipeline survived all that movement of 15 feet this way and 4 feet this way, and it took place right where the pipe was sort of laid on the ground on steel girders, right? I mean, to me, it was amazing, a testament to the engineers who designed it, right? And so I always had to try to make sure that the head of the pipeline in the Department of Transportation was not surprised by any issues, right? And so I had to have direct access whenever I needed to let them know what's going on. I have been around long enough to know what Alaska was like before statehood. I mean, I was around, I was a kid during the territorial days, right? Statehood didn't come till 59, and by that time I was, 18? And then, of course, I was in Juneau as a legislator in the earliest days of, I got there just 7 years after statehood. And, I mean, Alaska was barely surviving. I mean, Governor Egan was nickel and diming just to keep the little state apparatus functional. And he could hardly do anything for the cities or villages in those days. I mean, we had no capital funding. If you wanted to build something, you had to have a statewide vote, Whether if you wanted to build roads, you had to have a statewide vote. You wanted pioneer homes, schools, And so Alaska was just barely making it. And so I've watched, Alaska go from being poverty-stricken to having billions coming in, during the heyday in the late 80s after pipelines started flowing. And of course, to me, my concern is that it's not just village Alaskans, it's urban Alaskans who think Alaska is an easy place to live. It's not. Oil made it seem easy. because, you know, it's a huge state. It costs an arm and a leg to move from here to there, your body plus any stuff you needed to move, because we got no roads. We got one road, so to speak. Most states, they have roads going this way and that way, railroads over here, you know, canals, I mean, you name it, they've got it. Well, we don't. And so I think oil made Alaskans seem to think that it's easy. It's not. And so my concern is that we've lived in the best of times. And I would encourage young people to do everything they can to get a degree or learn a skill that they can use to make a livelihood. Because it's going to be harder out there in the future. The world is trying to move away from energy. It's been Alaska's lifeline. And my hope is that, you know, my own grandchildren will have a chance to make a livelihood here, but you know, it's I think it's going to be a real challenge out there. Well, there's some heroes that, you know, I think we need to remember. Mike Gravel. He was ornery, but he was our guy, and he was in the majority at the time of the ANCSA and also the pipeline. I mean, he's the guy that came up with the idea of having Congress declare that the pipeline met all EPA standards, right? And cut off litigation. That was very important, and it was a one-vote margin. I mean, I was there, right? And I handed a letter to Senator Jackson saying the AFN supported the pipeline to eliminate those questions about whether or not we are for or against the pipeline. So I put AFN on the line, and it was Spiro Agnew's one vote that made it possible, right? And so could we have we might have changed one vote if we said no, we're opposed to the pipeline, but I knew damn well we needed to have that pipeline as a state, as a community of people up here. We needed that revenue. And so Nixon, of course, was key, and there's about 3 people on his staff that should be remembered. Bobby Kilberg's the last one alive, I think, in Northern Virginia. Of course, you know, Stevens did a great job. Don did a great job. I mean, we have other heroes that took a stand. But Alaska wouldn't be what it is today had it not been for oil production. You know, I remember serving on a gas line committee about 40 years ago. And at that time, I think we came out with a report, but we were looking at LNG exports to Japan. That was our idea way back then. So, you know, I think it'd be wonderful if Alaska could have access to natural gas, and the world. It's just an economic challenge because there's so many producing areas that are so much less expensive to produce. I mean, if you had a country that wanted security of a source of energy, then maybe they would be willing to put in, you know, the billions that it's going to take to do that. But I think having in the cities having access to natural gas, maybe having you know, propane, methane, whatever it is that could be shipped down the rivers to villages. I mean, we need energy that's affordable out there. I mean, it's a killer out there for people in the villages to spend $15 or $18 a gallon in the dead of winter to stay warm. That's unaffordable.